Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
I want you to picture something for a second. It is Sunday, February 22, 2026. You are a truck driver, right?
Yeah.
You've just loaded up your rig. Maybe it's avocados or auto parts, maybe electronics. And you are heading north toward the U.S. border.
Just doing your job.
Exactly. You are expecting the usual headache, customs lines, paperwork, traffic. But instead of brake lights, you hit a solid wall of black smoke.
And I mean, not just a little smoke. We are talking about an apocalyptic scene here.
Yeah. The highway isn't a highway anymore. It has basically been turned into a burning parking lot. We are talking about nearly 200 semi-trucks and 35 buses all set on fire.
Which effectively paralyzes trade across one of the most important economic corridors in the hemisphere.
It creates this visceral image, doesn't it?
It really does. And that was the reality on the ground in parts of Mexico, specifically Jalisco and the border regions just a few days ago.
But here is the thing that really threw me when I started looking at the stack of research you pulled for this deep dive. Just as the smoke clears from that chaos, literally days later, on Thursday, February 26th, the U.S. Department of Justice drops what looks like a nuclear option.
Oh, yeah, they absolutely did.
We see unsealed indictments, charges of narco-terrorism, and a massive $10 million reward offer for two high-ranking cartel bosses in that exact same region.
It has been a whirlwind week for geopolitical analysts, that is for sure. If you're watching The Wire, your head is just spinning.
Right. So here's the puzzle we need to solve today, and it's a timing puzzle. You have massive fires paralyzing trade in Tijuana and Baja California on Sunday. Then you have this massive U.S. legal strike on Thursday. The natural reaction is to draw a straight line, right?
To say A caused B.
Exactly. To think the fires were a response to the indictments, or I guess maybe the indictments were a rushed response to the fires.
It is the intuitive connection to make. It definitely feels like cause and effect. But if you look closely at the sources we have, so the reports from the Border Report, the DOJ press releases, and the deep intelligence from Insight Crime, that straight line doesn't actually exist.
Really?
Yeah, the picture is much more complex.
Okay, well, let's unpack this, because I have a feeling this isn't just about one group getting angry at the U.S. government.
No, it's not. What we are seeing isn't a simple cause and effect chain. It is actually a tale of two cartels. We are witnessing simultaneous, earth-shattering hits against both of Mexico's criminal superpowers happening in the very same week.
Against both of them, so the CJNG and the Sinaloa Cartel.
Right, but for completely different reasons.
Wait, so the fires and the indictments involve different players entirely?
Correct, and that is what makes this moment so uniquely dangerous. You have the two biggest predators in the ecosystem taking massive hits at the exact same time.
Okay, let's start with the visual that grabbed everyone's attention first. The fires. This was Sunday, February 22. What exactly happened on the ground? Because burning trucks sounds bad, but the scale here seems unprecedented.
It was a coordinated paralysis of the logistics network. We have a report here from the Border Report that paints a pretty grim picture. As I mentioned, close to 200 commercial trucks and 35 buses were torched.
That is just...
And this started primarily in Jalisco, but the effects rippled all the way up to the border logistics in Tijuana.
200 trucks. I mean, that is a massive amount of capital infrastructure to just delete in a single day.
It is staggering. And we really need to pause on the economic toll here because sometimes we just hear cartel violence and we kind of tune out.
Right, it just becomes background noise.
Exactly. But for the people involved, this is a disaster. We have a quote here from Manuel Sotelo, the vice president of the Northwest Chamber of Freight Carriers.
What's his take on it?
He points out that for many of these independent truckers, this isn't just a bad day at work or a frustrating insurance claim. It is a total loss of their livelihood.
I can imagine. I mean, how much does a rig actually cost these days?
Wait. So Chulo notes that even a used truck, and that's without a trailer, costs around $25,000. A new unit, you are looking at $175,000.
Wow. And if you're an independent owner-operator, you probably don't have a fleet of backups sitting in a garage somewhere. You just have that one truck.
Exactly. So Tulo said some of these truckers can't afford to lose their rigs. Losing a truck to arson would be a total loss. And that's not even counting the cargo or the delays.
Right, the merchandise itself.
Yeah, he mentioned losses mounting by as much as $50,000 per load when merchandise doesn't move.
So Sunday is just pure chaos. The supply chain is literally on fire. My initial thought, and I think a lot of listeners' initial thought, was, okay, the U.S. is cracking down, so the cartels are burning trucks to say back off.
And that is where we have to be very precise with the intelligence we have. According to the border report and local authorities, this vandalism was actually staged by the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or the CJNG.
Okay, the CJNG, the new generation.
Right. And the trigger wasn't a U.S. indictment. The trigger was the death and the potential capture leading up to it of their leader, the drug kingpin Nemesio Oseguera, known as El Mencho.
Wait, El Mencho is gone.
That is what the reports are indicating, yes.
That is huge. He's been one of the most wanted men in the world for years.
He has. So the fires were essentially a tantrum or a strategic blockage by the CJNG following the fall of their head. It's what they call a narco-bloqueo.
A narco-bloqueo. Break that down for us.
It means a narco-blockade. When a major leader is taken down, the cartel reacts by seizing heavy vehicles, parking them across highways, and setting them on fire.
It's a physical barrier.
Yes, it serves two purposes, really. One, it creates that physical barrier to slow down military reinforcements. And two, it's a terrifying show of force to the public and the government. It says we are still here and we can still shut this country down.
So the burning highways, the terrified truckers, that was the CJNG losing its mind because they lost their boss.
Precisely. That was Sunday.
Okay, so while the CJNG is busy burning down infrastructure on Sunday, the U.S. government is apparently preparing a completely different kind of strike. Fast forward to Thursday, February 26.
Right. While the smoke is still rising from the CJNG chaos, the U.S. Department of Justice and the State Department announced a major offensive against the rival organization.
The Sinaloa Cartel.
Exactly.
And this is where we get into the $10 million question, or I guess the $10 million bounty. Who are they actually targeting?
The targets are the Arzate Garcia brothers, Rene Arzate Garcia, known as Lorana or the Frog, and his brother Alfonso, known as Achilles.
The Frog and Achilles. Sounds like a bad buddy cop movie, but I'm guessing they aren't the good guys.
Far from it. According to the DOJ press release and Reuters, these two are the plaza bosses for the Sinaloa Cartel in Tijuana.
I want to stick a pin in that term for a second. Plaza boss. We hear it in movies like Sicario or Narcos, but functionally, what does a plaza boss actually do? Is he just the regional manager?
Think of a plaza not as a town square, but as a franchise territory, specifically a strategic corridor for drug trafficking. If you control the Tijuana Plaza, you control one of those lucrative smuggling corridors into the United States.
It's like the ultimate toll booth.
That's a great way to put it. Nothing moves through that corridor fentanyl, cocaine, meth without your permission, or more importantly, without you taking a cut. You tax the movement. You control the local police corruption. You manage the logistics. It is a high-level executive position enforced by extreme violence.
So these brothers control the very region where all this trade happens.
They manage the operations in Tijuana and the surrounding municipalities. But here is the key shift, and it's a really big one. The charges unsealed on Thursday aren't just your standard drug trafficking indictments.
I noticed that in the DOJ release, the header doesn't just say trafficking. It says narco-terrorism.
Yes. Narco-terrorism and material support of terrorism.
That feels like a significant escalation in language. Usually we hear conspiracy to distribute or money laundering. Terrorism is a very loaded word.
It is a massive escalation.
Yeah.
And it is backed by serious money. The State Department is offering up to $5 million per brother for information leading to their arrest or conviction.
That is $10 million total on the table.
Right.
Why now, though? Is this just standard procedure, or is this a new strategy from the U.S.?
It appears to be part of a very specific policy shift. The DOJ release explicitly references the new administration stance. It mentions Attorney General Pamela Bondi and cites President Trump's executive orders, specifically numbers 14157 and 14159.
We see those numbers in the source material a lot. What do they actually do?
Executive Order 14157 designated the Sinaloa Cartel as a foreign terrorist organization, or an FTO.
So legally speaking, they are now in the same bucket as Al-Qaeda or ISIS?
In the eyes of U.S. law, yes. And AG Bondi was very clear in her statement regarding the rationale behind this. She said foreign terrorist organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel have spent decades poisoning our children no longer.
So the U.S. government is officially treating the Sinaloa Cartel not just as a criminal enterprise, but as a terrorist group.
Correct. And that label, narco-terrorism, changes the rules of engagement entirely.
Let's dive deeper into that label then, because sometimes these terms get thrown around in the news and they just sound like buzzwords. But legally, what does narco-terrorism actually mean for guys like the Arzate Garcia brothers?
It means the consequences are much, much steeper. We aren't talking about a slap on the wrist or a plea deal for 5 years. The DOJ release outlines the penalties here pretty clearly. The charge of narco-terrorism carries a mandatory minimum penalty of 20 years in prison.
20 years is the minimum.
That is the floor. The maximum penalty is life in prison, and that's just for the narco-terrorism charge. They are also facing charges for continuing criminal enterprise, international conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The list goes on.
So if they are caught, the plan is to lock them up and throw away the key.
That is the intention. And it's not just about jail time either. There's a whole financial strategy here, too. The press release quotes Special Agent in Charge, Tyler Hatcher, from the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit.
The IRS, like the tax guys are going after cartels?
Never underestimate the IRS. As the saying goes, they got Al Capone on taxes right.
It's true.
The IRS Criminal Investigation Unit is tracking the money laundering. Hatcher mentioned that René Arzate Garcia and his co-conspirators allegedly laundered millions through complex international transactions.
Follow the money.
Exactly. The goal of this operation, which is dubbed Operation Take Back America, is to strip these organizations of their resources. You can't run a cartel if you can't pay your soldiers.
And speaking of soldiers, we should probably talk about who René Arzate Garcia actually is, because the source material paints a pretty brutal picture of him.
Yeah, the DOJ describes him as extremely violent. He was designated a drug kingpin by the Treasury back in 2023. The indictment alleges he's involved in enforcement operations, which is essentially a polite way of saying kidnappings and executions, just to maintain control of the Tijuana Plaza. And he's accused of flooding the U.S. with fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine.
So bringing this all back to our timeline and that puzzle we started with, we have the CJNG burning trucks on Sunday because their leader, El Mencho, died or was captured. Then on Thursday, the U.S. designates the Sinaloa bosses in the same region as terrorists.
Right. And this is the aha moment for the listener regarding the correlation.
It's not that the indictments caused Sunday's fires.
No. It is that the ecosystem is destabilizing from two completely different directions simultaneously.
It's kind of a pincer movement, but from different enemies.
Exactly. On one side, you have the CJNG suffering an internal decapitation, losing their leader. That causes the physical chaos on the roads on Sunday. On the other side, you have the Sinaloa Cartel being squeezed by this new aggressive U.S. legal pressure, the narco-terrorist label on Thursday.
It feels like the entire board game is being flipped over all at once.
It really is. And for the Sinaloa Cartel specifically, this external pressure from the U.S. couldn't have come at a worse time.
Why is that? Are they running low on cash from the IRS tracking them?
No, it's worse than that. They are already fighting a war at home.
A war with the CJNG?
Well, yes, they are rivals with the CJNG, but I'm talking about a civil war, an internal war.
Inside the Sinaloa Cartel itself, I always thought they were this unified, monolithic super cartel.
Historically, yes, they were. But we have a really great source from Insight Crime that details the current state of the Sinaloa Cartel. They explain that the cartel is currently fractured. Since September 2024, there has been a deadly internal conflict between two factions, the Chapitos and the Maiza.
The Chapitos are El Chapo's sons, right?
Correct. And the Maiza are loyalists to Ismael El Mayo Zambada.
Oh, he was the guy who never got caught for decades. He was like a legend.
Until July 2024. And this is crucial context. El Mayo was arrested in the U.S. in July 2024. But he wasn't just found in a raid. The story, according to Insight Crime, is that he was allegedly betrayed by El Chapo's son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez.
Betrayed how?
The reports say he was deceived into getting on a private plane that he thought was going to inspect clandestine airfields, but instead it flew straight across the border and landed right in the hands of U.S. authorities.
Wow. So one faction essentially kidnapped the leader of the other faction and just handed him over to the Americans.
Allegedly, yes. And as you can imagine, that didn't just cause a disagreement, it sparked a violent battle for control. So bringing it back to our guys, the Arzate Garcia brothers down in Tijuana.
They are caught right in the middle of this.
They are trying to hold down the Tijuana Plaza while their own organization is tearing itself apart from the inside. And while the U.S. government is officially labeling them terrorists and putting a $10 million bounty on their heads.
That is an incredible amount of pressure.
It is completely unprecedented pressure.
You know, the Insight Crime source mentioned something interesting about the Sinaloa Cartel's usual tactics. They said they often opt for bribery over violence.
Yes, historically, they preferred to buy off officials rather than fight them. That was known as the Pax Sinaloa. They penetrated the highest levels of the Mexican government.
But with this new narco-terrorism label, can you really bribe your way out of that?
That is exactly the question. When the U.S. designates you a foreign terrorist organization, the diplomatic and intelligence tools that open up are massive. It makes business as usual, the bribery model, much harder to sustain. It effectively radiates toxicity onto anyone who even touches them.
So if you're a corrupt local official, suddenly taking money from these guys isn't just graft anymore, it's legally supporting terrorism.
Exactly. It raises the stakes for everyone involved. And that might force a shift in tactics.
A shift to what? Just more violence?
Possibly. Or more fragmentation. If the leadership is hunted down and the central command breaks, you end up with smaller, more unpredictable cells.
Which brings us right back to the start of our deep dive. The burning trucks. The chaos on the highways.
Exactly. We are looking at a perfect storm here. The CJNG is burning infrastructure because they lost El Mencho. The Sinaloa Cartel is being hunted as terrorists by a U.S. administration using new executive orders.
So what does this all mean for the person listening to this right now? Maybe they aren't in law enforcement. Maybe they don't live anywhere near Tijuana. Why should they care about Operation Take Back America or a burning semi-truck down in Jalisco?
Well, practically speaking, look at the supply chain. If you are waiting on goods electronics produce auto parts, remember that quote from the trucking chamber. 200 trucks just burned. The Tijuana Plaza, which is a major artery for trade, is under siege.
And insurance rates for freight are probably spiking.
Which means the cost of shipping goes up, which inevitably means the price of the product on the shelf goes up for you. Instability at the border is an economic tax on everyone.
And then there is the safety aspect of it all.
Right. The rules of engagement have changed. The narco-terrorism charge signals that the U.S. is taking the gloves off. It suggests a much more aggressive posture that could easily spill over into how border security is handled generally.
It really feels like we're entering a brand new era of the drug war.
We absolutely are. And the DOJ press release had a very provocative message for the cartel leaders. It wasn't legally phrased at all. It was almost personal.
I have it right here, actually. It really stood out to me, too. U.S. Attorney Adam Gordon said to the leaders of the Sinaloa Cartel who remain at large, hide, run, fight, flee, "The illusion is that you have a choice. The reality is that you can either surrender to justice or you'll be brought to justice."
Hide, run, fight, flee. That is not standard bureaucratic language. That is a direct threat.
It sounds like a line from a movie trailer.
It does. And that leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on today. With the CJNG burning highways because their leader is gone and the Sinaloa bosses facing life sentences and terror designations, are we witnessing the end of the traditional cartel model?
Or are we seeing the start of something else?
Right. Are we simply witnessing the violent birth of something much more dangerous? Because if these massive monolithic cartels shatter under all this pressure, what replaces them? We might be trading organized crime for disorganized chaos.
The Hydra problem. You cut off one head and 3 more grow back, but they're hungrier and much less predictable.
Exactly. A scary thought.
Yeah.
But one we definitely need to keep a close eye on as these indictments move forward.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.